Okay, we're going to start. Appreciate everybody being here today. This is a work session that we're going to kind of brainstorm and get some information prior to our budget hearings that are in the first 2 weeks of August. And I think those dates have been shared, the 3rd, the 5th, the 8th, and the 10th. And that'll be 8:30 to 4 daily on those 4 days. I sent a letter out or an email out yesterday for department heads to try to set up meetings with us. Minimally, it'll be Susan and me at those meetings, but there's been some other council members like to join us this year. And those 2 dates are the July 18th in the morning, and that's a Monday, and then Tuesday, July 26th all day. Already I've got responses. The 11:30 a.m. on Monday is booked already, and the 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday, the 26th, is booked already. We're going to start out, Jason Similar from Baker Tilly's here. The last several years, it's been very beneficial that he's given us a detailed, he or his colleague Paige have given us a detailed rundown of expected revenues. We need to know that information because we need to know how much money that we'll have in order to budget for everything for 2023 and beyond. And usually they give us a projection out at least 2 or 3 years, and he'll be going over that. So then later we're going to do some serious brainstorming and discussions based on the data that Jason shares with us. So Jason, you'll need to grab a mic or come up here. I think everybody, we're live streaming. So you can probably grab that mic for now, because I think mostly you're going to be presenting, and then we're going to take notes for a lot of questions. And Bobby will help you with the technology. If the green light's on, you're good.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Well, thanks for having me here again this morning, and I know Paige again went over the draft with you, I think it was last week or the week before, and she apologized that she couldn't be here, but she tested positive for COVID last week, so you're stuck with me today. But just wanted to go over the kind of, I want to say final presentation, because after you've prepared your budget and approved that, we'll incorporate those amounts into here and make a final report for you. But as was mentioned, we want this to be able to be a tool for you to kind of look at the amount of revenues that we're anticipating that you'll receive next year, and then you can base your 2023 budget based on those projections. So I did want to, I know you've seen this before, so I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. And if you have any specific questions about the numbers or any questions, feel free to stop me and we'll kind of address them, but we'll go through each fund. The first couple of pages are just kind of some accounting language, some of assumptions, some history about circuit breakers. I'll kind of skip through all that. But there are, if you turn to page 9, I did want to talk about some of the assumptions that we use, because that's the assumptions that we use are very important in coming up with the estimates for 2023. And some of these are different than what the page went over with you last week because we've gotten some new information. And the very first one, if you look at the kind of receipts at the very top, at number 1, this has to do with your maximum levy. So as you know, the state tells you how much revenue you can collect from property taxes each year, and that increases by the growth quotient and called maximum levy each year. And if you look at 2023, just in the last week or so, the state has certified on what the maximum levy will be for 2023, and it's actually 5%. I think we were assuming it was going to be 4.5%. It's actually more, so that's a positive, not only for the county, but all the overlapping units, is that you can increase your budget by 5% for 2023. So that's something different that we've incorporated that you didn't see last week with Paige. That's the positive news when your maximum levy increases. But as you know, as your maximum levy increases, if your tax base doesn't increase by the same amount, that means tax rates go up and circuit breaker losses go up. So if you look at number 2, this is the same assumption that we had used, but this is we use Policy Analytics, a firm that the state uses. They're estimating that your assessed value, you can see, is going to go from increase from $1,507,000,000 to $1,566,000,000. So that's just kind of an estimate based upon trends. I know you should be getting certified assessed values here within the next couple of weeks. So that's something that we'll watch closely with Debbie in the auditor's office. That once that certified amount is calculated, we'll kind of compare that to the estimates. And again, that's important because that will dictate this, the estimated circuit breaker losses that we anticipate that you might receive. That number won't be known until probably January, February, probably December the earliest. But again, those are two variables that really weigh heavily on the projections. And then again, look at the bottom of page 9, kind of number 4 assumption. Again, looking at the circuit breaker loss. This year, basically it says your circuit breaker losses were 20% of your revenue. Basically means you lost 20% of your revenue to circuit breaker losses. We're showing in 2023, that's going to be a slight decrease. Again, that was because of the increase in your tax base. So we'll kind of watch that closely and update that as soon as we get more information. Yes?
There we go. Seems like something we need to pick up is, so just to make sure I understand this correct, you're saying our total only increased by just under $200,000 in total max levy? Went from $10,032,000 to $10,225,000? From 21 to 22, and then 22
that looks like
to
that's dead
23.
circuit breaker.
23 would be 10,977,000. So we actually are seeing almost a $750,000 increase in revenue estimated this year.
Yeah, 10.2 to 10.9.
Yep. Okay.
Now that's gross, so that's before circuit breaker losses, but yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that is before circuit breaker losses.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. And then the other assumption that I wanted to hit is on page 10, footnote 7. This looks at all the kind of miscellaneous revenues, and the one that I wanted to highlight was the local income tax. We kept that flat for 2023. I think Paige mentioned this when she was here last week. We're hoping that you will see an increase in 2023, but to be conservative, we kept that flat for 23. We should receive an estimate from the state here the next couple of weeks for 2023. And usually the estimates that the DLGF send out are pretty accurate most of the time. So if we get any information here in the next couple of weeks, we'll let you know.
Okay, so both of those two that you've alluded to in the last few minutes from the state, those updates, we'll have prior to our beginning of our budget hearings then in early August, it sounds like.
Should.
Okay.
So again, I wanted to highlight those assumptions because as they change, so does the amount of revenue that you have available for your budget. But now going to each individual fund, if you turn to page 13, unless you have any questions so far on those assumptions. Page 13 is looking at the general fund. So this is the fund with the most activity. And I'd have to say, looking at where we started, and I think I mentioned this last year, where we started, 3, 4, 5 years ago, looking at these comprehensive financial plans, what your ending balance was then compared to where it now. You've made some remarkable strides. So I commend you and all the department heads because I know that was not easy. There were some tough decisions to make, but as you go through this, you can see that your balances increased substantially to what they were just a few years ago, and the trend looks like it's continuing in the right direction.
If I remember right, the first time some of us came on, it was 3% general fund cash balance.
The first year I did this, it was a lot less than that. So yeah, you guys have come a long way, so I commend you for that.
barely made payroll.
So again, it's kind of looking at the general fund, kind of looking at the ending balance. It was $2.2 million in 2020, $2.8 million in 2021. Looking at 2022, if you spend all your budget, you'd be ending the year about $3,067,000. And if you look at line 19, again, looking for 2022, shows that you'd be bringing about $15 million in revenue this year. If you look at line 32, if you spend 100% of your budget with the additional appropriations that we already have, you'll be spending about $14.8 million. So you'd be spending about $247,000 less than what you're bringing in. So you have pretty much a balanced budget, which is what I know Paige preaches, try to have a balanced budget, spend just what you're bringing in. So looking at 2023, we're estimating based upon the revenue estimates that you're going to collect about $15.2 million, $50,265,000 of revenue. Again, based upon the assumptions that we just talked about. So as you're going into your budget workshops, that's the figure that you want to try to stay within. Because if you go above that, you can see you have a balance that you could, use. But that's if you continue to have a budget that's more than what you're bringing in, you're going to continue eating into your ending balance. So that's not sustainable. So that's why you always try to preach to have an ending balance. We're just showing that in 2023, if you increase your expenses by 2%, that you'd have a surplus for the year of $175,000. We know 2% in this, time of the economy, it might be tough to do, but that was just kind of a placement holder, knowing that you're going to put together your own budget.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. So this disbursements of $15,089,000, is that this budget that Debbie just handed us,
No.
or is that just your that's just your assumption?
Right. Yeah.
Do we know a number on this budget, Debbie? Or is there a total in the back? I could look at that. General fund. So that puts us about $600,000 over budget. Okay, thank you.
So then as you start kind of fine-tuning that number, the decisions that you'll want to make as you start looking at some of these other funds, if you have any very healthy balances that you could maybe move some levy from certain funds to your general fund, you could do that. Or if you wanted to keep that budget, then you just know you're going to be eating into your balance by $600,000, or you need to cut the budget a little bit. Those are kind of your options. But again, if you were to, if you kept that $15.6 million budget, then you can see your ending balance would drop from about $3 million to $2.4 million. And keep in mind, we always recommend we try to keep a 15% balance. Again, our goal, if you wanted to have a very lofty goal, you'd like to try to have a 50% ending balance, because that means you have enough money in the bank to cover 6 months of expenses. So if for some reason you didn't get the settlement or it was late, you had enough money in the bank to cover all your expenses for 6 months. But as you can see there, we're at 15, 19, 20% operating balance. Those are pretty healthy. So any questions on the general fund?
I remember the first year that Paige, that I was involved, 2019, when we were hovering around 3% or less
Yeah.
balance. She kept hitting on, you guys really need to be 15% operating balance in your general fund. So I guess we achieved that in 2020. But inflation's killing us and every entity. I mean, fuel costs is driving everything out of sight. We can talk about that later, but.
Yeah, it's something, and even for this year, because a lot of the communities that I'm working with, they're already gone through or almost gone through their fuel budget, or pretty close to, halfway through the year. So that's something as you're, not only looking at, next year's budget, we might want to see if we think there's going to be additional appropriations to cover additional fuel costs. That might be something we need to take into consideration too, if there's things like that that you're aware of.
I think it's also worth noting that obviously the federal monies gave us a big shot in the arm, and that's why we've taken a big jump in our balance, because we've been able to shift some expenses to that versus the general fund, and so I'm certain that's why this has taken a big shot in the arm. Correct, Jason? I mean, we did a good job, and we were moving in the right direction, but we certainly got a big boost when the federal government started writing millions of dollars in checks to us.
If there's no other questions on the general fund, we can move to page 16, the public safety, local income tax. So again, this is one area that has continued to grow. Again, we've kept the revenue flat for 2023, but as you can see, if you were to keep the budget the same, or a 2% increase from 23 from 22, you can see that your ending balance is continuing to grow. So this is one area that if, you know, of that $15.6 million budget in your general fund, if there's any of those expenses that are related to public safety, you could move those to this fund, because this fund could probably handle it. Because right now it's showing, you know, based upon, you know, 2022, you're bringing in about $1,387,000. Your budget's $1,032,000. So about $355,000 of additional revenue this year. So again, you could move probably about $200,000 of expenses over here and still have a balanced budget. So that could help you with your general fund.
Well, and we also have to keep in mind, we're no longer paying out-of-county inmates to the rate we were, which is what caused this fund to take a huge hit. We nearly flatlined this fund trying to pay for out-of-county inmates, but now that the jail's open, this fund should have some more flexibility.
Page 19 is your correctional list. So this, if you remember, this is the local income tax that we put in place to pay for the bonds that were issued for the jail. As you can see, a little over $1 million. Almost $2 million coming in. The annual payment on the bonds is about $1.7 million starting next year. So that leaves about $250,000 left each year. And if you remember, since you adopted the tax rate after 2019, you can use up to 20% of this revenue for operating costs. So again, if there's money in your public safety or your general fund that's related to the jail, you could move those expenses over here and pay for it out of here.
Are there any limitations? I don't recall that there are on that 20%. I mean, it can be used for any operating, including salaries and that kind of thing.
So you have some
As long as
flexibility.
it's related to the jail.
Right, correct. So you have some flexibility to move some expenses over there as well. Next fund we looked at was on page 22, the reassessment fund. So this is one where you can see you did reduce, if you look on line 2, you did reduce your certified levy from this fund. You can see you collected $331,221. We're only expected to collect $248,000 this year. And you reduce that fund because if you look at your ending balance, you know, you had a very healthy balance there, $145,000, $181,000 in 2021. 2022, you can see that if you spend your entire budget, you'll have a shortfall of $84,000. Now, this fund hasn't typically spent everything that's been budgeted, but as you can see, by already reducing the budget from last year, you have a healthy balance, but it's kind of right where that, you know, 30, 20%, right where you want it to be.
So again, you wouldn't recommend this go lower than 20%?
No, I mean, I would recommend even going higher, but I mean, 20% I'd start working on your general fund, getting that higher. But yeah, this fund I'd probably keep where it's at. Unless you see some major differences in the spending from what we're showing here, it's right where you want it to be, I think. The next fund is the Park Non-Reverting Fund on page 25. So this is kind of where we're just showing, again, kind of the expenses equaling the amount of revenue that you have coming in each year. So this is one where you can, move the levy around if you want to, but knowing if there's a shortfall, you'll have to subsidize it from the general fund. So any questions on the park fund?
So it looks like it's about where it needs to be. I mean, we're in good shape.
Yeah, well, and if you look at line, 10 and line 19, you can see we matched the expenses to match your revenue. So we kind of forced it to work out. So again, if your park expenses are more than what we're showing on line 19, those differences are going to have to come from somewhere else, more like the general fund. But again, that we're keeping it right around a 20% ending balance. Page 25 is the health fund. So I know this is one fund that you a few years ago looked at and increased your charges for services, and you can see, revenue had increased somewhat.
What page you on again? Because 25 was
28.
Okay.
So again, this is also a fund that is partly payable from property taxes. So this is someone where you can move maximum levy to or from as you can see fit. But based upon the current revenue streams and the current expenses, again, you're staying right around that 20% ending balance. So again, it looks pretty healthy as it is. Page 31, local health maintenance, the next fund we looked at. The revenue coming in here is from grants. There's not a whole lot that we can control here, but again, looking at the expenses, if they continue, it's eating into the balance, ending balance a little bit each year, but for the next 3 or 4 years, we look like you're okay. That's something we'll need to continue monitoring if those expenses do increase for whatever reason. More than what you're bringing in grants and more than what your ending balance can handle. That's something we have to look at, maybe moving some of those expenses to another fund. But right now it looks fine.
I think they received a lot of federal monies,
Right.
grants, COVID, CARES.
And usually those, the expenses match the grants, just depending on what kind of grants. Sometimes those are renewable, and if they don't get renewed, but you still have those expenses, then you have to make some decisions. Page 34 is the statewide 911. So you can see here, again, these are, revenues. This is outside the property taxes based upon service fees. You see the revenue coming in. You can see in this 2022, there was an additional appropriation of $68,000. Based upon the budget, you do have $108,000 in other services and charges. So if that comes to fruition, you can see there on line 15, you'll be spending about $148,000 more than what you're bringing in. So that does eat into that balance there. And if you can see if that budget continues, in 2024, we might have a shortfall. So that's something that we'll want to monitor, and if that were to come to fruition, that's something that we might have to move some of those expenses to the general fund or public safety.
I was at a statewide conference AIC and County Councils Association in Bloomington a few weeks ago. This is a hot topic at the state level. The state needs to step up and increase that. Expenses are increasing. They've pretty much kept the same amount over years. And so as expenses go up, you're going to see our balance go in the negative. Most every county in the state's experiencing that same phenomenon, and their concerns everywhere. It's not just Henry County. That was brought up numerous times at that conference because there were state legislators there, and they're aware.
Yeah.
It's just, are they going to step up and do something to fix that?
The next fund that we looked at was page 37. That's the community corrections user fee. Again, fees that they collect. And as you can see, last couple years, they've spent more than what they brought in, but there's a healthy balance so they can continue to do that. And then pretty much spend what they bring in each year. But as you can see, there is a pretty healthy balance there of over $300,000. So if there are some, potential budget items in a general fund that qualify under this, you could potentially move some of those expenses over here.
I know when we had her sit down with Joni Williams last year, we were telling her what we had in mind on an increase, and she says, it's grant funded. The state tells me what I can do and not do.
Limited.
I think she was able to kind of meet halfway with what we were trying to do. The state upped what they originally told her, but this one seems to be a lot out of our control.
Yeah, if it is mostly grant funding that is restricted in a lot of cases. The next couple of funds that we looked at are MVH and local road and street. So on page 40, MVH. I know this is one fund that these funds here, like we made great strides in the last couple of years. So again, looking at the revenue coming in the current budget, you can see that's been growing. And we're anticipating that continue to grow.
The budget that was submitted is almost $400,000 over your projected on this fund. So I think there's been some huge increases in cost of materials, and
I think we're going to see a lot of budget requests over what's been estimated in the past, again, because of what Chad said.
yeah, the inflation's going to kill us.
Well, he said asphalt itself's gone up 25%.
Yeah.
Because it's petroleum-based, which has gone up 50%. I mean, it's inching down, but it's a big hit.
So again, that's where, as you're looking at your budget, look at line 8 when you're looking at your operating revenues and what you have to play with this next year, and then your ending balance. Page 43 is the MVH restricted fund. Again, it's also increasing. So I know you guys do a good job of this, and you have since the inception, but again, the restricted can only be used for new construction, maintenance items. So again, as much of those projects that qualify under that, I would definitely allocate them to this fund as much as you can. And then page 46 is your local road and street. Again, about $785,000 is what you should be collecting this year. We've estimated the same thing for 2023. And again, this is kind of a fund you typically, you kind of spend what you have in the fund, and as they accumulate, you fund large projects or use it for matching grants. So it just shows the amount of revenue that you have and what you could pay for out of this fund. But it shows that, if you do spend everything in 2022 that you've budgeted before, that budget could continue for quite some time before you eat into your balance. So that will help some of that inflationary costs, at least for a few years. One fund that you do have some flexibility in is on page 49, is your will tax. Because that's where you're generating about $1.7 million a year. And you can see your budget's only about $154,000. You did have a capital outlay this year of over $2 million. But again, this is where one of those funds, as inflation hits your other funds, you might be able to still pay for some of your.
So this one is way off. The requested budget is $2.8 million, not 154,000. So that pretty much wipes out the entire balance of the fund, leaves $200,000, $300,000.
I know some of his salaries are paid out of LOHUT. He's got kind of a mixed bag. I think there's like several heavy equipment operators, assistant superintendent. Those are, and some others, I think there's 6.
Yeah, the salaries are about $200,000 of the 2.8.
So, inflation.
And that's where, as you start getting more information on those budgets, and if you need help kind of manipulating some of the numbers, and feel free to contact Paige and I. We can start kind of updating those so it's easier for you to see the impacts.
So Chad's basically saying that this 2,000% operating percentage is probably
Yeah, based
way
on that
under
budget,
that. Maybe
With-
25% maybe at best.
They're estimating a $150,000 expenditure, and the department requested $2.8 million. So
That'll eat a lot of the
that's
3.1
definitely going to skew
million.
it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so you'd be using all your revenue plus probably eating about $1 million into your ending balance.
That was a short-lived happy face there.
Something you could do, it just wouldn't be sustainable after 3 or 4 years. Page 52, the self-insurance fund. So I know this is one fund that's kind of out of your control to some extent as far as the expenses. But, based upon the last couple of years and going forward, this looks like this is going to be accumulating.
Didn't we hear that we've got a 5% expected increase in our health insurance cost plan that the county has to pick up at 5% because there's not going to be any alteration to employee contributions to it.
Okay.
That's going to take a chunk.
Yeah, and I think we're only showing 2%, like I said, so we can adjust that to 5.
Might as well
or
go ahead
higher.
and adjust it to 5 because that's pretty consistent what we're told, right, Bobby? 5%. But we were told, I think when we came on, we were told it'd been averaging 6-7%, and it had gone down quite a bit the last few years. So it's creeping back up
Yeah.
like everything else is creeping back up.
Yeah. Page 55 is the Cume Bridge Fund. So again, this is a fund where you oftentimes kind of accumulate a balance and then oftentimes have some large projects. Just kind of, pay for projects that you can afford. This is one where you can move levy to and from. We've kept the levy pretty consistent here around the $340,000 amount. So again, based upon the 2022 budget,
If we were to consider increasing this, it's a balancing act because it would eat into our general fund,
yes.
which would have a very negative effect on what we're trying to do. But
Right.
when I looked at the AIC handbook that puts these revenues and funds for every county, all 92 counties, we are the lowest cumulative bridge in East Central Indiana. And 350,000 won't do much of a repair on one bridge. To replace a bridge, it's not possible.
Yeah.
Unless we go through federal, and there's so many hoops to federal projects, it's unbelievable. It'll get 20% in overhead.
Now, we did keep, this is a rate-driven fund, so you can keep the rate the same. We kept it the same, so as your assessed value hopefully grows, that will generate more revenue for you. But again, you're right, as you try to put more revenue over there, that takes away from your other funds. The next fund, page 58, is your Cume Cap Development Fund. So this is outside the maximum levy. You're at your, basically your cap point 0.033. So again, this fund, you're eating into your balance a little bit each year to help cover capital expenses. Again, but based upon your current cash flow and current ending balance, that is something that you can sustain for a number of years. So this is another one that, as your tax base grows, this will generate more revenue for you. And then your last fund that we just looked at was your rainy day fund. And we just kept that constant at the $205,000 that you have there now. Again, that's one that I don't recommend that you use unless you really have to. If anything, probably not at this point, but once you start continuing to accumulate cash balances, maybe even moving some money over there from your general fund to your rainy day fund.
Paige hinted that we ought to boost that. At the last session, she said that's
She suggested what?
boost it, increase it,
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
because it's been that amount for 5-6 years. Everything else has gone up, and our rainy day fund wouldn't take care of much in a catastrophe. And if it weren't for the federal, we'd be in worse shape now
Right, yeah.
than what we are.
I'll defer to Paige, but I hesitate to transfer over there too soon, just because of all the budgets that you're looking at and the increased costs. I'd hate for you to transfer money over there and then next year have to transfer it out to cover some of your operating costs. So maybe after we have a good handle on the approved budget at the end of this year and see where you fall at the end of this year with the increased costs, maybe look at transferring something over next year. Well, I know I kind of quickly went over those, but again, do you have any specific questions about any of the revenues?
Can you go over page 62, maybe as much for the audience or anyone listening out in cyberspace, that our local income taxes that we've adopted, I think last year we calculated was maybe 60% of what we could, and their area entities have tapped 100%. We won't mention names, but
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Page 2 looks at how the local income taxes are kind of broken out between the 3 different buckets. You have your property tax relief bucket, which income taxes are used to help reduce property taxes. You can levy up to 1.25% in that. The county has adopted 0.25%, so you can see that it generates about $2.4 million in revenue. So what that really means is that you're collecting countywide $2.4 million in revenue, so that reduces the amount of property taxes that you have to levy. So it's help reduces property taxes.
I mean, it doesn't help county, it helps the taxpayer.
It helps both, yeah. Helps the county because it keeps property taxes low, helps reduce circuit breaker losses, and also helps the taxpayer because it reduces their property taxes. The second tranche, kind of there in the middle, is called the expenditure rate. It can be up to 2.5%, and then you can see it's kind of broken down into further buckets. Certified shares, which the county has at 1%. The public safety local income tax, which the county has at 0.25. You could also adopt an edit tax, which the county has not done yet. And then, of course, the correctional and rehabilitation rate of 0.2% for the jail. And then the third tranche is a special purpose rate, which a number of counties do have a special purpose rate where you have to go to the legislation and get special legislation for a local income tax specific for a specific project, like a jail fund or a courthouse. Those are much more difficult to get now than they used to be.
Would-
So your total, the county's total tax rate for local income tax is 1.7%.
Out of a maximum of,
3.75. The 1.25 plus the 2.5.
is our food and beverage a special purpose, or is that another entity, or?
The food and beverage, that was special legislation as well. The county had to go to the legislators and get that passed. So that is something that I don't think anyone here has any desire to, but that is something if you were looking at increasing revenues, really this is the only option that you have is to increase local income tax.
I know in 2019, when we were operating on a razor-thin balance, Paige or you kept saying, you could raise the taxes, you could raise the taxes. And it looked like at the time that was the only way we were going to get out of near red.
Yep.
Fortunately, we didn't have to. I mean, fortunately for the taxpayer, we kept that steady, but.
But as I said, as you start getting more information from your department heads and start having more conversations about the budgets, if you do have questions that, again, it might look like you can afford the budget that's being presented to you based upon the revenue stream and your current balance. But if you want us to look at, okay, what will that look like 2 to 3 years down the road, we can easily do that for you and turn something around for you to look at.
Last year, we used this a lot.
Is that the
I think
cash flow that Paige put together?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
summary of 2022 budget. When might we get a summary of 2023 budget? What kind of information do you need to?
We haven't sent it to her yet. We just got done with budget back on Monday,
Okay. That was helpful when we got into budget hearings in 3 weeks. Very helpful, in
Yeah,
fact.
I think that will be the next step is once you gather all that, send that to us, then she can kind of summarize it for you. So we
Okay.
digest.
Thank you. Council, a lot of information. Questions for Jason?
If there's no other questions, I did hand out one other schedule that I think we've talked about. It's been a couple of months ago, but I wanted to bring it back up because it's important as you're going through the budget process. As you know, in the last, I can't remember how many years now, maybe 5, 7 years, you've kind of done a rolling general obligation bond to help pay for some of those capital expenditures that you couldn't fund through your general fund budget. Well, this schedule right here shows you have 2 bonds outstanding payable from property taxes, the 2019 GO bonds and then the lease rental bonds of 2021 for the Justice Center. So you can see in 2021, the tax rate was a little over 12 cents. This year, it's going to be, it's 11 cents. If we kept the assessed value the same, that means the tax rate's going to drop from 11 cents to about 9 cents. And that's because the 2019 bonds just has a half-year payment left next year. So we have to budget for a half a year. So if, and then in 2024, both bonds completely drop off and mature. So your property tax rate for bonds will be 0. So you'll see about a 10, 11 cent rate reduction in 2024. So I know the goal of the council in the past has been, one, if you have projects that you need to fund and you can't afford them through your normal course of business, levy or issue a bond to keep the tax rate level. So that's something that if you don't do that this year, close on bonds, the tax rate's going to drop from 11 cents to 9 cents. My guess is probably going to actually drop less than that because I think your tax base is going to increase, reducing the tax rate, I hope. So if you want to keep the tax rate level at that 11-cent range and you have projects that you need to fund, you may want to consider issuing a bond this year so your rate doesn't drop. If you want your rate to drop a couple of cents, then we could wait till next year and issue a bond so it doesn't drop from 9 cents to 0. So you have some options. It just really kind of depends upon your needs. But if you want to issue a bond this year, or even thinking about it, you don't have to make the decision today, but it's something you would have to budget kind of as a placement holder for a new tax service levy. So that's something I already talked to Paige about. That might be something that you might put in as a placement holder because things may change between now and December.
Was the 2019 bond like around a $2 million bond? Is that what I'm remembering, Jason?
Yes, I think so.
Was it 1.8? I don't know. I've got the comprehensive
It's
financial
like
plan here,
1.7
so it's,
left, I know.
Because we've spent more than $100,000.
I want to say it was around $2 million because I think Debbie was still in the clerk's office and we used around $800,000 for the voting machines, and then the balance of the 1.2 million went to the expo. Yes. 2019 bond.
2019 was,
I can't
Yeah.
remember.
I'm thinking, but I don't see it in here for some reason. I would have thought it'd been in this.
It's in there, but it just has what's outstanding. It doesn't have the original amount.
we had a bond after we came on, Chad.
It's on page 67. So there's like 790,000 outstanding, but I don't remember what the original amount was.
Oh, I was pulling off of previous years.
What was the bond where, fixed the elevator and a lot of other miscellaneous items?
That's. Okay. That's what I thought. Okay, thank you, Debbie.
So it's something you don't have to do, but like I said, as you're going through your budget, if you do have any of those, in the general fund of that, part of that 2.6 million is capital, and you don't want to eat into your budget, or it's something that you need, that might be something to think about, existing with another short-term bond.
Well, we always have needs. I mean,
Yeah.
this 1868 courthouse probably need a couple $1 million in renovation at today's cost. We just haven't sit down and come up with a prioritized list of needs. We've been kind of doing that in ARP on that committee. The needs are great and the revenues are limited.
Well, and as you talked about, your budgets are only increasing faster than your revenue coming in. So, again, a bond issue is really the only other way besides increasing income taxes of kind of really generating revenue to pay for capital projects. Can't pay for operating, but it can pay for them capital projects.
So if we were to do something, it would keep the burden of the taxpayers the same. Otherwise, it keeps going down if we have a major need or a collapse of a building or unforeseen, then we don't have the monies to do that, except going further in debt.
And what we try to avoid is, what you don't want to do is have your tax rate, go down and then, completely drop off and then have a big need and then raise taxes by a lot. Because you want to try to be consistent.
We had a discussion on the middle school project. There was a bond. The high school was about to go down, and if they didn't do that, otherwise they would have gone further in debt. And it would have had a.
Yeah, schools have been doing this for a long time, and I think counties and cities and towns are starting to catch up with the kind of keeping those real small rolling bond issues so the tax rate doesn't fall off.
Well, that's probably council, you may agree or disagree. That might be a topic that near the end of budget hearings. But how much leeway time do you need? Are we talking 4 or 5 months if we were to do something for 2023, or
3 or 4 months.
3 or 4?
It's kind of the same process that we did for the food and beverage bonds.
So this is something we could take up near the end of budget hearings, yay or nay, or the pros and cons. And somebody would probably contact you or Paige to get the details. Does this go through Lisa also, or? Okay, I thought so.
It'd probably be a similar conversation that we had with the food and beverage. You kind of look at different sizes and different terms, and we can present scenarios for you to look at what you think's best.
Preliminary numbers.
Do you have any certain dollar amount that you'd like to see?
We don't have a list yet, but
Well, then it kind of gets to how far out you want them to go. You want to go out 3 years, 5 years? That's
that's been typical lately.
okay.
Yeah, definitely no more than 5.
Okay.
And that's, we have come up with a list of major needs
Okay.
to justify that.
Yep. We can do that.
And I don't think it would take us that long to come up with a list of major needs because they're all around us. We have failing, aging buildings and infrastructure and components within buildings.
One thing to consider on the dollar figure, the Justice Center needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
The HVAC, the air conditioning, the chillers, we're getting an estimate from Pine on all of that. I believe at one point he said we need about $2 million.
The needs are out there. And what Bobby just said, that's been a discussion in the ARP committee.
Some of that stuff has been in there since the building was built, and I believe those chillers are, close to $1 million.
Yeah. So that, confirming, if you could get some numbers, that would give us something to mull over near the end of budget hearings. After we take care of the major issue at hand, the budget. Other questions for Jason?
I mean, the same thing that you guys have done historically. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, if you looked at the number of counties that increased their income taxes, there were quite a few. So a lot had done that in the last few years. The health, and looking at those services charges, which you guys did a couple years ago. You know, right now, I think everyone's kind of on wait and see with the inflation. We're hoping assessed values do increase. That's going to reduce circuit breaker losses. The income tax, we're hoping that increases a little bit. But it's going to be probably either cutting services or eating into those balances that they've accumulated, and hopefully it's going to be a short sprint before maybe the costs start coming down a little bit. Well, there's not really much to cut because most counties like yourself have cut just about everywhere they could, you know, when the circuit breaker tax first came into place. But they're looking at, you know, maybe if there's any places where, you know, if people are retiring, that they can kind of become more efficient. That's, yeah. 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 So that's somewhere which the other thing that we're getting contacted, it's kind of the opposite of where you're going, but the other thing that I hear from counties is you just can't, and we had the same issue in our company. It's just hard to keep employees because they're, you know, going somewhere else for more pay. So that's something else that we're you know, counties are asking us to kind of look at you know, where your salary ordinance is compared to other counties or the market even, because you're losing, you know, employees. You know, you guys just got built the new jail, of course. That's one thing I'm hearing from a lot of counties who have built new jails is their budgets look really good. They haven't spent nearly as their budget. It's because they can't find, they have employees budgeted, but they can't find them, or there's, you know, the turnover's so rapid, they can't hire them quick enough, so they don't spend all their budget, and that's the reason why.
That's
So they're
happening
looking
here.
They're looking at increasing salaries to try to be competitive. So again, not to answer your question, but that's something that we're also seeing counties specifically have those issues that try to keep the employees they have, you know, look at ways to increase, become more competitive.
The difficult decision is, you know, when you talk about attrition, knowing when to cut fat versus cutting muscle. We start cutting muscle. Okay. There's a big difference between cutting fat and cutting muscle. The department heads would know far more about the difference between those two than what, you know, we're part-time. I mean, we don't know these things. That's one reason I hope that every department head meets with us, because we've cut a lot already. I think we're told that we have either 20 openings currently or anticipated over the next 2 months. That's almost 10% of our workforce already that we don't have filled. So I would hazard to say, you know, these departments that have 3 or 4 people, one person leaving is going to make a greater difference than a department of 10 or 12 that loses one person, theoretically, I mean, on paper. But we don't know if that's the case in real life.
And my guess is it's something you've already been doing over the last few years already, which is why you're down number of employees in various departments.
Well, we're experiencing exactly what we have: people leaving for better paying jobs, and every place I talk to, they're having, you know, help wanted and not being able to fill positions. You know, the jail, I think we filled half of the vacancies we had last year. But on our way to the jail, there's a big sign of what GEO is paying across the street. And it's hard to keep up with that because they've raised from $17 to $18 to $19 to $20. And I think the last time I drove by, it says $21 or something. And we're competing with not a different county. We're literally competing with across the street. Literally across the street. And it's hard to compete in our current climate. So we're losing good people to better pay elsewhere, and yet the revenue forecast may be up 3% or 4%, depending on how you look at it. But our expenses and our employees' expenses are going up 5, 10, some areas, well, gas, 40%, and that's after it's come down a little bit lately. It was 50% higher. Healthcare, groceries. I just went through Kroger, and I can't believe some of the costs of things that used to be 30, 40% less. So it's hitting everybody.
Where I think you have a little bit more flexibility because you adopted the jail lit tax and the public safety is you do have some, it looks like right now, some flexibility to move some expenses over to those 2 funds to maybe help with some of those increased costs. And the costs you're talking about are public safety and jail, so.
This is me, just me, not speaking for any, because we haven't talked about anything yet. We might in the next hour, but what would be a comfortable ending balance if we dug into our cash balance a little bit on the general fund? I mean, are we back to 15%? That was my thinking because I heard that, but I mean, is that dangerous to do, or is that enough buffer that we can ride the storm out?
Well, I guess you say 15% is the minimum that we suggest. And if you think about 2008, when you had the Great Recession, those counties that fared the best are the counties that had healthy balances. So if you were to come, you know, with a recession next year, which is what some are projecting, some think we're already in it, you know, you want to have a healthy balance because we don't want to be where we were back in 2017 or wherever we had, you know, $300 in the general fund. So that's where I would not recommend dropping below the 15% if you can help it. If it's short term, you have to, but again, that's our recommendation is don't go below the 15% as a minimum.
That's the absolute bottom line that you'd recommend? Okay. So we're in a quandary, like, sounds like most counties that you're dealing with, especially when it comes to balancing inflation with losing employees and wanting to do what's best and maintain employees. I mean, I think the morale is low. And every place I rub noses with people, I go back to the school system, the morale is low. I mean, you go to industry and they're losing people and have openings and the morale is low. I don't know if it's a national phenomenon. I just don't think it's a Henry County phenomenon, but it's, people are on edge, I think everywhere, so.
The other thing, when you mentioned the 15%, again, I'm hoping that your local income tax is going to increase for next year, maybe in the year after that, because of the 2-year lag. But again, if we do go into recession, if companies do start laying off or not have all the job wanted signs, we could see your local income tax go down in 3 or 4 years. So again, that's another reason why to have that healthy balance is not just for this year or next year, but in 24 and 25 and 26. If your local income tax was to go down, you'd have some balance to be able to sustain the budget that you've approved.
Anything else for Jason? You filled Paige's shoes very well. That was a very similar, complete presentation and overview as she has given in the past.
Yeah, we could do that.
Other requests for Jason that relates to the job ahead of us over the next 5 weeks?
Well, thank you.
Thank you. We'll take your microphone back. Okay, members, what's your big takeaways? We need to know how we're going to match revenues with anticipated expenses, which we don't have all that information, but we have a lot of it. And we know inflation's eating away. Chad's got a look on his face like you don't have all the answers. Why are you here? Go ahead. You have something on your mind.
Well, I mean, it's just, I think we're going to have to get very creative. I mean, obviously, I've not had a chance to go through the budget. Debbie just handed it to us, but as Jason was going through, I was comparing the numbers on the sheet versus the budget that Debbie just gave us, and in every single case, their estimate is way under what was actually budgeted. And so I do know, obviously, there was raises put into this budget, which I'm sure was part of it. But, I mean, if you look at like the CCD fund that the commissioners turned in, Jason budgeted about $500,000. The commissioners budgeted $680,000, which would completely eat up all the revenue plus all the reserves. But there was a big increase in computer maintenance, which obviously is needed. I don't disagree with that. There was an $80,000 increase in computer maintenance on that line, which we have a lot of computers in the county and costs are skyrocketing on these things. So, and that line has been sorely underfunded for years, frankly, because I don't know how many times we've had to do transfers or additionals or something to fund that line. So I'm not picking on the commissioners. I'm just saying that we're going to have to be very creative. In my thinking, the only places I really see, which is what Jason brought up, is we shift salaries into the jail lit, and we rework the safety lit to where it covers, maybe like right now the sheriff's vehicles are in CCD. Maybe they go back over to jail lit or safety lit. Or we look at other options. If we go with the GEO bond, maybe we put the sheriff's cars in the GEO bond for the next 2 years or 3 years. And we allocate of that $2 million, $450,000 for the next 3 years goes to sheriff's cars. I mean, we're going to have to get really creative with less than a $200,000 increase, and our insurance is a $4 million a year expense. At a 5% increase, that's $200,000. The increased revenue that Baker Tilly is telling us is $190,000. The insurance alone just ate up every bit of our revenue increase this year. And that's before we talk about the sheriff's vehicles. I guarantee you when the commissioners go to get their bid this fall for gas, I promise it's, what is it, about $2.80 now, Bobby, something like that? I promise you it's not going to be $2.80 again. I mean, that alone could double. We could see a $4.50 price on. Yeah. No, so I mean, there's. And that is not a never-ending flow. That money will run out. And so, and while I understand what Kenan was asking about reducing our balance, the thing about reducing our revenue balance is if we take our revenue balance to pay bills, whether that's salaries, whether that's utilities, whether that's gas, eventually you pay the piper because that money will run out. And then what do? Do you just start laying a bunch of people off?
And we're not looking at good economic times, so it's
No,
something to
I
take
mean,
into our
plus Jason's concerned with reduced revenue in the future, which, because I think just about everybody in this room be hard pressed to argue that we're not headed right into a recession with massive inflation and the cost of goods going through the roof just in general, plus everything. I mean, it's just, the interest rates are on the rise. I mean,
I believe this inflation is going to continue. The way the federal government's, everybody's spending money like crazy.
yeah. And I certainly would never be in favor of a tax increase. People are already getting absolutely pounded right now with inflation and cost of goods going through the roof. I can't see, I would never vote for a tax increase.
Yeah, I would do a lot of, I would
Yeah,
do
they're-
anything before I voted for that.
I would tell the sheriff he can't have any more cars. Sorry, John. Before I would do that. I mean, there would be, yeah, because people are absolutely getting pounded right now in.
So obviously CARES Act, ARP, you know, we keep hearing talk of infrastructure money and other money trickling down to us. Do we have any sense at this point of what that looks like?
I will say at the conference I went to, they're just starting to talk about infrastructure monies filtering down to the states. And there's no specifics how far that's going to filter, like to municipalities and counties.
Sure.
No one knows. And if so, how much, what percentage?
Right.
I have a feeling it's going to be eaten up at the federal and state levels predominantly.
It probably will, and I was really disappointed. I know the Ready Grant process was something we were really excited about, and our region really, $15 million for East Central Indiana, we did the worst in the state basically compared to all the.
1.5 million was a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, so, and I know we have a couple projects highlighted that we hope to get funding for, but I guess I have tiny bit of hope that some of the infrastructure money might make its way down to us, but we can't bank on that. It's just a wish right now.
The highway department budget, if you add up all of their funds, it's over $1 million over revenue estimates. the highway department.
That's not
If you add up all those funds, which is not surprising with the math, we've had a 9%, they've had a 25% increase in their cost of goods. And so, and they could withstand that this year, but what happens next year? Their revenues are going to be pretty much wiped out.
We also know that these increase in salaries are not enough to get everyone to anywhere near close to market wage, because this is 600,000. I mean, if you look at the increase, we know it's more than that.
Yeah, to get everyone to the average wage in the WISC report that we got,
1.5 million.
$1.5 million is what it would take to get the entire county to the average wage. $1.5 million.
Well,
And we're already $10,000 in the hole just on insurance. And that's before we
You know,
look at
everything
any other
you just
utilities.
mentioned.
Sorry?
Everything you just mentioned, any revenue increase has just been eaten up by,
Yeah.
It's going to be fuel and insurance. Those two things alone is going to eat up the revenue increase.
Now, the good thing is I think we do have some positives, like I mentioned earlier, with the not paying for the out-of-county inmates. We paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for out-of-county inmates last year. Now, the majority of that was eaten up in balances that we had. It wasn't necessarily revenue, but it definitely ate into the balance that the safety lit carried. I mean, so we will, but we have to build those balances back up because they aren't there. So it's, but that's not going to be a long-term solution. And we're only talking, which, yes, I'm going to say only couple $100,000 maybe, but in a 15 million budget, that's not a lot of money. That's 1%, a little over 1%.
When I had teachers come in complaining about this or that, I started getting wiser over the years and said, for every complaint, I want you to bring back 2 solutions. Are there solutions to the negatives here? I mean, it's easier to point out the negative, but where do we find the monies? I think on everybody's mind is to try to do a reasonably to give raises that are noteworthy and will do some good and maybe stop the bleeding on lost staff. But where do we find the monies for that? I agree with Chad. We're going to be very creative this year. I mean, the jail, we can tap the jail the jail tax. The safety lit, we can do some of the sheriff's department. We don't have that luxury across the board in the general fund. Now, highway is through their own tax rate. Health is through their own tax rate. I happen to sit on a board of one department, and they went through their budget, and it was a 24% increase on what that board passed. And I said, that's not going to float. I mean, it just can't. We can't sustain that, but they also have their own tax rate.
Well, but their tax rate affects the general fund rate. So they don't actually have their own. The council sets their tax rate, and we get one number, and then we carve out percentages to the other departments.
Same with the park. Community
Yeah.
corrections, we don't have a lot of say
No.
because the state determines that. There's a matrix in the sheriff's department that makes it a little bit more complicated to figure out because it's based on seniority. We talked about longevity expenses not being that great to maybe incentivize long-term employees to stay because it's like incremental, what, $200, $400, $600,
Yeah.
$800, $1,000. I mean, with inflation rate, that's not much of an incentive for somebody who's worked here 20 years to want to stay when they can go across the street and make $10,000 more. And we can't fix that in 1 year.
Yeah, and you know, I only speak from personal experience. You know, my wife has decided to leave the county. I think it's very widely known. She wasn't even looking for a job and got offered multiple positions, making considerable more money with better benefits. So the days of the county having the great benefits and all that are awesome. The only thing the county offers is the perf. But you know what? If you make $8,000 more a year and you put your money in the bank, you put some of that, just a little bit of that in the bank with the 401k match, it will more than trump that perf in no time. And then you actually get to keep the money. God forbid an employee leaves, and we have had employees retire, and they're only retired a year or less, and they get nothing. But their families, if you have 401k, your family walks away with all of it. So, I mean, we don't have those huge incentives that we had. We do have 17 paid holidays, which trumps anybody out there. So 15 paid holidays. That's right, 15, right, Bobby? Excuse me, 15 paid, which is more than I've heard of pretty much anybody. But it's still, the county, for our predecessors, in lieu of money, gave perks. But those perks are not, I mean, people hire in, I've hired 2 employees this year, and they start out with 3 weeks paid vacation. You have to be here, 7 years, I think, to get 3 weeks? Or is it 5 years? I think it's 5, maybe 5. I don't remember, but I'm sorry, I don't have that memorized. I can't, but it's, I mean, literally, people are starting out. My wife started out brand new with 23 days of vacation in the first year as a brand new employee. So, I mean, we don't have the big perks like we used to because this whole market has shifted so much that now we're stuck because our predecessors gave away perks instead of cash and tried to figure out the hard choices back then a little bit at a time. And now the majority of our employees are at a bare minimum 10%, some 20% under average market. And when you make $30,000 a year, an extra $6,000 a year makes a difference. That's a car payment. That's that's paying your entire grocery bill plus for the month. I mean, that's huge. And so, I mean, I don't know. I know, Ken and I didn't bring all the solutions. I'm sorry. I just brought the problems. But
Well, and
unfortunately, I don't know the solutions.
no, it's an impossible situation, and I think probably everyone in the audience understands that we're desperate to make things as good as possible, and it's just a really hard place to be in. Certainly, I agree that creative solutions are going to be part of the relief here. Something else to consider, Ken and Susan, when you meet with department heads in the next few weeks, I think having really candid conversations with them, it's going to be a trust exercise of like, hey, we know we've gone through your budgets year after year with raisers. We want to get you exactly what you need. Where can you trim the fat? There's no fat. There's very little fat. But do you need as many people in your office as you have? We want to get raises up. I would encourage department heads to come with solutions as well, like work with us. We want you to have what you need, but we're all in a tough place here. So I hope those conversations are really candid and beneficial.
I'm wondering, I don't think we'll know until budget time, but I think it's possible that we have reached a point where we are going to have to choose between raising taxes and reducing services. And I don't want to raise taxes, so I'm wondering if we're at a point where we need to look at what would happen if we didn't offer the same services at the same speed. And I think without department heads coming with those answers, there's no way that we would know. So I would like to know from department heads what would happen if you had one less employee, theoretically. If you do a certain job that's critical for the county in 2 days, would it take 4 or would it be impossible? Because I don't know those things, but I don't really think we can make good choices for the county until we do know those things. And I also would like to explore job sharing. So if you lost an employee, but you could grab them for a few months, if it was the right person. So I hope when we meet with department heads that people can give that information. I'm curious if departments could run short a person and go up 40 hours per week if the employees got a 15% raise. Would they be willing to work 5 more hours a week? And I don't know the answer to that question, but those are the kinds of questions I'm curious about, just in the form of brainstorming. So my desire is to give a significant raise because I think that the people who are working here should have a significant raise. And I don't think that we're going to fill open positions with the salaries that we have set right now. And so I am open to any possible suggestion for how to do that, knowing that you guys know how your departments run better than I do. But I think any option, any brainstorming, any idea that anybody has is something that I'd like to hear.
I've been around here a long time and on the council, and I tell you, when I came in here, I didn't see any less people than we got right now. I know that the different county offices is not, they're spread thin, so I don't know. I get around and talk to people, and we're going to have a real issue here. You hate to get rid of your staff if it's going to really just hurt your department. At least that's the way I feel.
Yeah, I think a lot of, several offices during the hiring freeze back after the tax caps lost employees. Is that right, Debbie and Jody? You guys were here. You guys were here. I mean, I think they kind of already went through this once. And I'm not sure, I mean, I looked through that email that you sent that Ann prepared and looking at the salary ordinances. I mean, obviously you can't cut the sheriff's department. You can't cut the jail. You can't cut the highway department's already barely operating. I mean, and then you look at certain departments in this building. I mean, Debbie's got 3 less positions than she took the job with. Jenny's got 2, right? Than she took the job with 3 years ago. You've got. Yeah. Yeah. And there's still 2 open positions, so technically 4. I mean, at times there's only a couple cars on the road. Thank God we've got a great reserve department, or we would be in trouble in this county with the sheriff's deputies. So I get where you're coming from, because by and far majority of our budget goes to people. Salaries, taxes, insurance, and benefits. The majority of our budget goes to people. I mean, you look at a budget like Jody's, I don't think she has hardly anything in her budget but people. I mean, the election department's a little different. I mean, some are different, but I mean, you look at Linda's office, you look at Steve's office, their entire budget is people. Debbie's office is people. There's just not a lot of places that.
But we're going to end up answering the question, are we going to raise taxes or are we going to reduce services? Maybe not. Maybe when we actually work through it, we'll find solutions. But if our tax receipts hang at this level or go down over the next few years, it may be unavoidable.
I think you're right, Susan. I mean, that's what we're looking at. And whether the economy recovers and what that looks like that's the big question. But I know, well, I can only speak for myself, and I heard Chad say it, but I do not want to vote to raise taxes when everyday families are getting absolutely killed right now.
This is kind of another my way of thinking. We're almost forcing a reduction in headcount by not raising salaries. We're just not saying it out loud. Every time we lose someone, Jody's short 2 people. Will she be able to hire people at that salary? Maybe she will. But if she doesn't, we're not saying out loud that we're reducing headcount, but we have, because she won't have those people. And we also, if we keep them budgeted, can't take that money and reallocate it to people who are working. So if we're not going to raise the wage for those positions, we might as well take that money and give it to the people who are still working in that department. Actually say out loud what's happening. Debbie has open positions and she can't fill them at the salary that's posted. So we are not going to fill those positions. We may keep people here if we don't raise salaries significantly. I'm not sure it's fair to them, but they may stay for other reasons, but we won't add people. So I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to look at it the way I see it. I mean, those positions are open and we can't fill them because the wages are too low.
I heard the other day on TV, on the news, and the average American American family is going to end up spending about $6,000 to $7,000 more a year now because of the inflation and causing everything to go up, of course, as you well know. How you go into a filling station and end up filling your tank up, depending on what size of car you got, it's going to take a lot of money.
Were you done, Harold?
I think it's up to the public what services they want. No, and some services we're obligated by the state, and of course we want to do. I know. Right. I agree. I know. I just want, yeah. What if the process happens slower? Could it happen slower and still work?
Do we still have any of the employees, well, the office heads naturally don't know this, do we still have any of the employees working back and forth between departments? I know one time maybe we had one or two, I don't know. If I had heard that, I didn't know.
Well, I think you're right. I think it's a balancing act. It is a balancing act. And we need the department heads to tell us the difference between cutting fat and cutting muscle. And are there any services that we can look at? Do we need to be looking at automation? Because I know I go to some counties where things are a lot more automated than what, and it's going to cost to do automation, but do more things online. I mean, reasonable things online. Some counties, I can do everything online and not have to physically come in or drop a check in a box or at the counter or send it in the mail. I can do it electronically. And I think that those are reasonable things we could explore, but we don't know the cost of them. Okay. So most of the things like birth certificates we can do online. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. So that's off the table. But those kind of things we need to be exploring. I guess I'm not aware of what all we do. That's another reason why I think we need department heads to educate us. Okay. 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 And I'm sure there's a lot of essential task that takes a human being one-on-one in person. So I don't think anybody up here is talking about making massive cuts. I think what we're looking at, we're not able to fill the openings that we have because we're not competitive. And that's going to be natural cuts through attrition because we're not getting the employees to apply, and that's what we're trying to fix, yes. Well, I know that it's paid out of LOHUD funds. That is a position that right now, at the rate that was set at the last council meeting, is at full market. We have about 20% of our employees that are currently paid at low market, which is 10% full market. The problem with Wagner, Irwin, and Shealy, and I didn't know this until last year because I was telling people that their data is based on counties with similar assessed valuations and economic climate as ours. I was told that it's based on all counties around the state. So they're comparing us with Hamilton County and the donut counties in Indianapolis, and actually Marion County has a higher tax rate. We all have the 2.5, except Marion County has, 2.75 or 3 as a max. We will never be able to pay what Hamilton County does, Carmel, because their tax base is probably 10 times what ours is. So at any rate, I know that's been a sore point since that meeting. I don't know how to properly address it, except what I said at that meeting is they're down 40% of staff in that department. And if they don't have a person out on the road, as I said, cracking the whip, there has to be accountability because they're working. They had 36 when Joe Wiley was hired. They have 22 employees out there, and we still have 770 miles of roads. 22 employees are trying to fix 770 miles of roads versus 36 20 years ago. So I know that's a sore point, but this person has taken a $25,000 reduction from what they're making now. Go ahead.
So that is actually 14% over market rate, according to WISC. But the thing that I want to clarify is back when they had 36 employees, they weren't contracting out all of this labor that they are today. We're contracting over half of our labor out. So if you take that 36 and divide it by 2, we actually have more staff than we used to have, because they're contracting more than half of their labor out. We never did that when we had 36 employees. So just want to make sure you clarify that, because that's the reality of it, is they didn't, back in the day, they did not hire all these other third-party contractors. They also didn't have that grant, the $1 million road grant that they got and things that they used to do that. But yes, we are contracting more than half of our labor out. So our workforce is pretty solid at the highway department. It's still, it takes everything they got to get it done, I agree. But, you know, that the market rate for that position is $55,000, and the council, most of the council, I voted no at $62,500 is what they paid that position.
Well, it's right at full market. It's not 14% above. I've got the stats right here.
I'm looking at the WISC report, and the WISC report says it's for the assistant superintendent is $55,128 is the market rate.
That's low market.
So-
I mentioned full market.
But
Low
you-
market is $49,615. Maybe you have a different report.
No, I think
than I do.
you're right. I looked at it last night too. But you've said yourself that even those average market value rates don't make us necessarily competitive.
No, I don't disagree
And
with that.
so I agree with what you're saying, and I think your point about the highway department not being as short-staffed as what we keep saying is really valid. So I think that's good. But this is my way of thinking about it, and it might not be right, is that when Joe comes and says, my department works best with a good manager and $10,000 of fewer materials, because it's going to come from somewhere. I agree with him. I can see that a good manager would make his overall department more effective than $10,000 of asphalt. And I am looking for the same types of things from department heads. I could do my job better with this, and I am guessing that some of these open positions are really harmful to these departments. They don't have enough people. So if someone said, if I raise these salaries and made this other change, that my department would work better this way, and that's what I'm open to hearing.
As an SO, I was correct. What else, council? Well, right now, according to Ed, we do have 20 openings.
I was going to ask Ann, though, because it looked like we had more correctional officer openings than, or more jail openings. I counted like 9 or 11. But if you actually go through our salary ordinances, Debbie sent us salary ordinances for what was budgeted, and it was much higher. I was just curious what the difference was.
At the time I did this report, I used the Harris for the positions themselves, and I ran it also with the salary ordinances. So there were 40 salary ordinances for 40 positions for jail officers, and I found where there were 35 that had filled. So that's where I came up with the number 5.
I think we had, correct me if I'm wrong, in conversations that I've had with some employees over the past couple of weeks, we've had several part-time move into full-time to take those positions
Correct.
at the jail.
Correct.
I'm looking at the sales ordinances, salary ordinances you gave us, and it looks like there's like 11 open jailers. Okay.
Yeah.
It's
And now,
just a big difference.
also note that that could be supervisors, also regular COs, and there's different, the poll positions can run 2, 3, and 4. So anyway, I just did with what I had. Now, that's based on that last payroll transmittal. So it would have ended, I think, July the 1st.
According to my calculations on the spreadsheet, it takes, and this is really an estimate that's rounded, it takes about $100,000 for every 1% increase in raises across the board, given our 220 employees. That's all we've got. How many employees do we? 232. It's up here.
215 on this list,
Okay, that
but
should be,
232 salary ordinances.
okay.
And then said 219 filled, but there's 215 represented on this list.
To give everyone a 4% raise, according to my calculations, would take about $340,000, but if you add 25% for fringes, it's closer to $425,000, which is roughly the same as giving every employee a $1,500 raise. Now, giving a 4% raise, and I'm not saying this is even possible, I think the budgets that were turned in us was based on, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Debbie, based on a 3% raise. Nope. Yeah, and last year we had some that submitted with no raise, but we ended up giving them raises. Giving everyone a $1,500 raise would be roughly the same as giving, on the average, for the 230 employees. But right now, we have 219 because of all the openings. Would cost the county about $422 to $424,000 either way. Now, a $1,500 raise, and I'm not saying this is possible, would benefit the person at the lower end of the scale making about $30,000 than it would the person at the higher end of the scale making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. Because at $1,500 at $30,000 would be a far better raise than. So the question of percentage or flat amount, what I have down, that the previous council awarded a $1,000 stipend to all employees in 2015. A $1,000 raise in 2019. We gave an additional $500 stipend in January of 2021. Last year, we averaged 4% across the board, but the jail and sheriff's department ranged more like 6 to 8%. And a lot of that's eaten up by payroll deductions required by state or federal law. What did you say, Chad, was going to be the amount? How many thousand for a 5% raise in insurance? 200,000? It's a balancing act. Community corrections, we don't have a lot of say in. 911, part of that's through a state grant, part of that's through county. I think if I remember right from last year, 2 pull 3s and 1 pull 2 is out of our general fund for 911, and the rest is out of a 911 grant. Highway department has its own tax rate, park department has its own tax rate, health department has its own tax rate. Part of the highway department is paid out of LOHUT. So there's different things going on. We gave the highway department CDLs a $3 a raise increase back in 2019 before we realized the impact that was going to have. We were new and naive, I think, but that did make them more competitive, and they didn't lose the number of employees that they were losing dramatically prior to that. So they've lost employees, but not nearly as much. We're not competitive with other counties. Is the bottom line. So how do we fix it? That was a question. How do we fix it? How do we make it better for our employees, given everything we heard today? We might be able to inch towards the low market of Wagner, Irwin, Shealy, which is 10% below full market. Again, remember, they've calculated in some counties that we'll never be able to compete with.
Can we ask them to recalibrate those numbers?
I did. They said no, because our employees can drive to Hamilton County and get a job. We have Chrysler employees from Newcastle that drive to Kokomo. I can't imagine, but they do.
Right. How
My
much are we
daughter
paying them
works
to
in
not-
Zionsville.
Sure.
No, Speedway.
I mean, it can't be that hard to do a donut.
They won't do it, I asked.
How much are we paying them?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, if
I
they're
don't know.
not
But
willing to
they
run
do that
those.
to every county. A lot of counties use Wagner, Irwin, Shealy.
Right.
I thought they used comparable assessed valuations.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that until last.
Do they have a competitor that's more willing to
I
meet
don't
our
thi-
needs?
Most counties use Wagner, Irwin, and Shealy out of Muncie.
Yeah.
And their rationale was our employees can go to any of these much richer counties and work. Now, if they're calculating transportation costs, that's going to eat into a lot of that. Like, so my daughter works Speedway School Corporation.
Right.
Every day she drives back and forth. Gas is consumed probably a good portion of the increase she's gotten in salary. They pay well,
Sure.
but not, a lot of it's transportation now.
Yeah, I'm just unamused that, I mean, for whatever we're paying for this service, that they maybe wouldn't try to tweak it based on our specific needs.
I tried
I
last
know.
summer.
I believe you. I'm just curious what we're paying for
I was
that.
surprised because I had been advertising to people that Wagner, Uwer, and Shealy gave us information based on comparable assessed valuation and revenues. And no, there's a lot of counties that are better economically. I mean, they're growing like crazy, and they're paying their employees a lot. Carmel pays probably 25% more for teachers than what Henry County does. And we lose a lot of teachers. And that's why we're losing employees, because we can't be quite as competitive as the county, 2 counties over.
When you were at the AIC meeting last month, was there any discussion of, I mean, I know we're all going through this. We were talking about it at the Republican convention last month too. I'm just curious what others are going through. I tried to get to that with Jason. You know, what are the best practices of other counties? Pretty much all of us are going through the same thing. At the conference you attended, was there any discussion on that?
They were all lamenting of the same concerns that we are, some more than others, because some counties are in better shape than what we are. Some are growing. The donut counties are in much better shape.
Right.
But they have growing pains as well. But everybody was facing the employee shortage. Everyone was having issues with filling openings, keeping up with inflation. There was talk about automation, which I brought up. It seems like we're well on our way to doing what we can, with maybe a few exceptions. There talk about the kind of things we've talked about here today. But I go back to, there's a fine line between cutting fat and cutting muscle. I don't know how we're going to fill the 20 positions that are open, because some of these have been open for quite some time. You know, do we look at people working at home? I mean, we talked about in the ARP committee allocating money for remote workers. Are there some tasks that can be worked at home? Can we give employees an option to work part of the day at home? If they can be just as productive on the computer, I don't know if that's going to save money or not, but a lot of people are thinking outside the box because they're in survival mode. They're facing the same things that we're facing.
I wish we could see we're thinking of creative solutions. I wish we could fast forward a little bit and see what creative solutions our peers come up with. And anyway, we're initiating those conversations now. I don't know if that's even possible, but.
The lower wages are to begin with, the more extreme the crisis, right? So counties who weren't quite as below market value might not have quite as extreme of a problem, maybe.
I think our goal should be to strive. Last year, we gave the largest increases in 15 years. We were just starting to see inflation rate. We thought we were hoping that inflation would ease up. It hasn't. When we gave most of our employees 4% raise, which is the most they've had in years, it's been all eaten up. It's been all eaten up, more than eaten up. I mean, the national inflation rate's 8.5. Gasoline's easing down, but 4.49 to 4.69 compared with $3
It's still
a
not
year and a half
really,
ago,
right.
it hurts to put $75 to fill your pickup. The pickup gets parked. More people are driving mopeds. It's really bad, and I know our employees are facing that. We need to strive to get as close to low market, I think, as a start. We did that last year because our jailers were pathetically underpaid. As one example, we moved the lowest pay employee to $30,000, which is way too low. You can't live on $30,000 in this climate. We gave our sheriff's department a good boost, and they've had some ARP monies as well. And I think not everybody, but everybody that met the criteria got $1,750. and premium pay, those that qualified under the federal rules. And most of that was federal rules. They weren't our rules. They were federal guidelines that we were given. And a lot of employees that were first line, EMS, health, and others got over a $5,000 raise that they've never had before. That's a one time. That's not going to happen again. So how do we get close to low market? I think we can get close to low market this year. But if we were to replace all 20 people, which we've not been able to do, we can't do it. Insurance going up 5%, we can't do it. There's going to have to be some other solutions. You're smiling, Peggy. You surely has. You're just a sponge. You're just a sponge. Kyle, we've not heard much from you. Are you a sponge? I know you're new. You've been on 6 months, and we're talking about things similar to what we faced in 2019. We were $750,000 in the red on insurance in 2019 when we came on. That was the gift wrap present in our lap.
Hey, Kyle, could you use your microphone?
Oh, this one doesn't bend as well. All the pieces are fitting into place. Seeing everything outlined helps quite a bit. It's just a matter of there are tough decisions that everybody has to make this year across the state and counties, but they don't have to be tough decisions from the standpoint of the people that we're working for. And I think we're all on the same page as far as what we want to do from the general conversations that we've heard today. So talk about being outside of the box, thinking outside of the box, being creative. You know, there are just going to be tough decisions that have to be made, and whether that is, you know, the possibility, I think we all have to be open to the possibility of doing things that we would never ever want to do, which is the possibility of maybe an increase in taxes. Nobody wants to do that, and nobody wants to pay more, but it's something we have to be open to considering. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that it's okay to say, I can't support this, a raise in taxes. And I'm not saying I want to raise taxes, but I'm just saying that if we need to get as close to market rate or up to at least the low market rate like we're talking about with employee salaries, getting them more competitive, we might have to make a decision if that's the only way to do it. That's not going to be comfortable for any of us, but it might benefit the county and the employees as a whole. So that's just something I think we all have to be open to considering based on what we heard Jason say earlier. He kind of outlined two real options, it sounded like, in his presentation: cut services or raise taxes. If I misinterpreted that, then my apologies.
Right now, so what you're saying, we need to be open to everything. Nothing off the table currently. There's preferences, but
There are
nothing
preferences,
off the table. Entirely saying,
I don't think we can take anything off the table, because if you take stuff off the table initially, then you're going to be doomed to make poor decisions that might be short-sighted, that don't look at the full impact of things, you know, 3 or 4 or 5, 6 years down the road.
or at least limiting options.
Yeah, limiting your options.
Right now, I counted up 41 employees currently already make low market. But that's 41 out of 200, let's round. Let's say 220. Let's just say 220, because I didn't hear what you said. My left ear is kind of, but at any rate, 41 are at that. Does that mean we don't give the 41 any raise? No, that would not be right, because they're still far behind full market rate. Everyone in this climate deserves a raise, with possibly only one exception that's been brought up, because they already got their raise. But otherwise, even people that are at low market deserve, a decent living raise, a decent living wage. But we also have people that are 25 to 40% under low market. And part of that is because the way we've set up the prosecutor's office and the public defender's office is different than what most counties do. And I'm sure that's not calculated into what Wagner, Irwin, Shealy. So that's another thing we've got to balance. We have some exceptions to the overall rule of other counties. Community corrections we can't do much with because that's state. Probation, some of that is determined by state kind of matrix, kind of like the sheriff's department. So some of that, and I think she left, but I think there's one person up for a big jump in probation. Like last year, I think Chad noted there were 2 or 3 that cost us a lot because their jumps are more like 5,000 jumps. When they go from like year 5 to year 10, they take a substantial jump, and part of that is
they have their matrices they have to work with as well. So
right. The sheriff's matrix is, and I mentioned, and I've talked to a couple of you, because I can't talk to more than 2 of you, break open door. I've talked to a couple of you about longevity. There should be an incentive for long-termers to want to stay, because when somebody's hired next to you and they're making almost the same as what you're making, you've worked 25 years and somebody comes in making within $1,000 of what you're doing, that's kind of disheartening. It's not much of a pat on the back. I mean, we have some perks. When it comes to retirement, we have perks because we deal with those perks when they retire. Unused sick, unused vacation, all that. Those are perks, but it doesn't necessarily pay the bill currently. So longevity of $200 doesn't seem to be like much of a pat on the back. So I mentioned a doubling in the people that I got feedback from, so that's not much. It's not. In today's climate, going from $200 to $400 is 3 trips to the gas station.
From my experiences, the biggest perk that I've heard county employees from various or state government employees say is, at 10 years, for working long term, at 10 years you're vested with your perf, right? That's been the longest, most substantial perk that I've ever heard a government employee really discuss outside of vacation time and paid holidays. So
perf, yeah, that was huge, and that's the only reason teachers teach, is because they have a retirement package, and most companies have done away with that.
Right.
They've gone to 401ks, and like I said, and I'm just going to use my wife's example. My wife is 41 years old. She's got a long time to work. For her to get her perf, she would have to work here another 17 years, and I think she would draw about $900 a month. If she makes an extra $8,000 a year for the next 17 years, I promise you that's way more than the $900 a month. So that kind of is getting negated because of our benefit package used to be phenomenal, and that's why a lot of people used to come to work at the county. But just out of kind of funny, my wife just texted me what the rates were at the hospital and where she's going to work at, and the deductible is less than half of what our Plan B deductible is, and the rates are barely half of what. Yeah, it used to be that it was a big deal, but it's really lost a lot because in most places they give, that if you put in 5, they give in 2% and 3%, and some even 5%. There's some dollar for dollar match at 5% in our community, and that 401k will quickly make it up.
That's the same point that's the biggest perk that's offered, but it's not a substantial perk.
No,
anymore, based on the way
the 15 days
business
of
works
holidays
in the
are
United
about the
States.
biggest perk you get anymore here, and that's just it's unfortunately, like I said, I think we inherited, and we've said this, but our predecessors, commissioners, council, and everything gave all these big perks when other employers didn't. and now the other employers do that as well, and now we're in trouble because we're way behind because they kept the salaries going too. Bring this to you, Bobby.
Make a comment when Susan said when somebody, you've been here 15 years and somebody comes in and making the same thing, that's because we use the job classifications. You know, and
We need to be open to not doing job classification. I mean, any option, I think,
yeah.
needs to be on the table.
you know, and the other thing that, and Stephanie you can tell me if I'm wrong. So let's say somebody's been here for 7 years, they've paid into perf, county's paid into perf, they don't go get another job that allows them to do their perf, and that perf just goes away, we don't get our money back. It stays at the state.
Right.
So that's over the decades, that's a substantial amount of money that I actually talked to our state rep about that, and he's like, yeah, no, they're not gonna give it back to you.
It's 11 1/3.
Yep. So all the employees that we have put the perf in, and they don't ever go into another perf job, it just goes away, we don't get any of that back, the state keeps it, which is, yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, we're not touching insurance, right? That's a commissioner thing.
Correct.
We're not looking at that.
Well, because if I hear everybody right, we don't want to raise taxes on the citizens, we don't want to raise taxes on our employees.
Have you guys already made that choice, just so we know?
Well, I
It's
don't, I mean, it's
done.
not, that's my choice. I don't know about the other two. That's my choice.
It's just good for us to know.
I don't know about the other two, but, you know, if nobody wants to raise taxes on the citizens, I don't want to raise taxes on our employees. You give them a raise and then we raise their contributions. That's not a raise.
That's counterproductive. Yeah, that's not a net increase in anything. Okay, we advertised it would be over at 11. I think Debbie said that our live stream ends at 11. What I would suggest all employees to do, do you have any thoughts, comments, suggestions, positive suggestions on how maybe we can fix the issue? Please get with your department head. And we have sit-down meetings, like I said, on the 18th, a week from today, John, and 2 weeks from tomorrow, Tuesday, yeah, the 26th. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Just a quick question in regard to raising taxes. I know that, you know, we don't want to raise taxes, or that's what I'm hearing. And I understand that. We pay a lot, our family pays, I think, about $60,000 a year in land taxes only here in the county. I get that, but, you know, raising taxes, I don't know what it would cost per household to raise taxes enough to give the county employees a raise. But I'm just going to throw a number out. Maybe it raises, maybe it costs a household $200 or $300 in a year. But we seem to be dead set against that, and we're like, we don't want to ask that of our families yet. We will ask our county employees to work at a $5,000 to $8,000 deficit per their household. So I just want to make sure that we, you know, we talk about a balancing act. I've heard that 50 times today. Yes, it's a balancing act. So let's balance. If we're talking about raising taxes that might cost $200 or $300 per household, we don't want to do that, but we're good to let our county employees work at $5,000 to $8,000 to $10,000 less per household. I'd like to see that balance come into play somewhere as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think most of us heard everything's on the table for now, and we'll start having to eliminate things. And I think the information we get from the department heads will better inform us. Shannon, you have something? Yeah. Yeah, could you come to the microphone? Well, I'm not sure we can hear you. The acoustics in here over that air conditioning is not extraordinary.
I have a couple of things. One of them is you need to budget whatever dollar amount it takes to pad these seats, first and foremost. Second, heard you say there's 20 open positions, so the departments are working as hard as they can, as efficiently as they can to work with fewer people. I heard you say there's 41 positions being paid below what they could or should be paid. I talk louder than the mic, sorry.
Above above
41.
low market, which is 10%.
41 or above market?
Yes.
So the
Low
rest-
market, which is 10% less than full market.
Okay. In the market, in the environment that we're in, when employees leave, it's not going to be the subpar employees that leave. It's going to be the good employees that leave. And you're going to be left to run all of the county with employees that are not the highest performing. Unless you make the necessary arrangements to make certain that they can operate those departments with less resources, you're going to have to pay the employees more. And maybe if you pay them more, you can get more performance out of them, better performance. You can keep the higher performing employees from going elsewhere. Efficiency, you hit technology, you hit automation. Technology is what I would refer to. The Indiana Office of Technology will do an assessment for the county and tell you what technology you may or may not be able to implement to try to do things more efficiently. I think that's something that needs to be considered. You can spend other dollars, one-time dollars, to put technology improvements in that maybe you can shift some responsibilities around and get some operational efficiencies that you couldn't have done without some technology investments. So just my two thoughts, thought I'd share.
Thank you. Thank you both. Anybody else? We're going to be cut off on live stream. Again, all employees, please get with your department heads and share what's on your minds, your hearts, your suggestions. And I hope every department head meets with us. I know Susan and I will be part of that, and there's other council members that would like to be part. If we go over 3, we're going to have to do a 48-hour announcement to the press because we'll be a quorum. Yep. I have a motion to adjourn. Oops. What? Oh, did you have something? Or do you want to adjourn? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thanks. Good to see you. Thank you, everybody.